everyone. Welcome to Itil 4 Awareness Masterclass. First of all, I would like to present you IT chapter, where you are. This is an organization, IT chapter, which I co-founded in the year 2003 with my business partner, Olivia Abekassis, who is a vice president in IT chapter. We are located in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, headquarters, and we have branches in Ottawa, Toronto, Quebec City, and Paris. We are an organization of IT experts. Our main expertise is in IT service management, cybersecurity, business relationship management, and the governance of IT. Our consultants are helping our clients in these areas and domains, specifically improving IT processes, implementing ITSM tools, and conducting audits and strategies for cybersecurity and other similar tasks. And also we're providing training. We have more than 50 certification courses, including Agile, DevOps, IT asset management, business relationship management, and of course, Itil 4, and still Itil V3 for those who are still interested to learn Itil V3. We are women-owned organization, certified women-owned organization. I'm a president of this company, and 65% of our employees, trainers, and consultants are women. Well, these are our presenters. Each presenter will introduce herself or himself individually. Just briefly here, while you see my picture, Svetlana Sedenko. So on the left is Olivia Abekassis, a vice president of IT chapter. And we have Xalani Nguena. Lucky to have you, Xalani, today. Giovanna D'Angelo, thank you for joining us. And Costa Samaras, also, thank you very much for supporting us in this presentation. So we'll move on. And as I said, each presenter will present themselves individually, starting with myself. I'm an ITIL expert and ITIL managing professional, business relationship management expert, and certified governance of IT professional as well. I'm a lead trainer and practice manager in IT chapter. So this is who I am, and I will now introduce you our masterclass, and I will cover the main concepts of Itil 4. To start with, here is the Itil 4 certification scheme. So it's important to start here to understand what is Itil, how it's all structured. If you have never been yet introduced or exposed to this, it's a good information to know. So we are in just an awareness class, which is a small overview and introduction of Itil. However, if you want to get trained on Itil, here at the bottom of this graphic, you see Itil Foundation. This is a certification course, which ends up with exam. And people who take this course can get certified in Itil. After that, you can get certified or trained on any other level of Itil here and become either Itil 4 managing professional or Itil strategic leader. There is something for everyone, for each profession in IT, whether you are in delivery or operations or in customer facing role or in high velocity IT, or you are a leader. So I will invite you to explore further in our portal in IT chapter. So we provide all these trainings, all the levels, and the details are there. Moving now to the objectives of this training session. As I said, it's a high-level overview of Itil. We will introduce you ITSM, Itil vocabulary, explain you the concept of service value, and we'll cover some selected Itil practices, namely incident, problem, service request management, service desk, change enablement, and service level management. Agenda here, so you've all seen agenda in your invitation. The only thing I would like to add here that we'll have a sort of a break in the at 10:30, and we will have two periods of live questions and answers. You have Q&A button in your interface, so don't hesitate to start sending us questions as you see them, and we will summarize them and answer. If we will not be able to answer all these questions in these 10 minutes before break and 10 minutes after break sessions, we will answer all of them via email. We will send you the summary of answers of these questions. Now, what is service management and how IT service management is evolving in the modern world? A little bit about the definition. So who saw this definition in the past? Maybe some of you already were exposed to the previous versions of Itil, Itil v3, or maybe even Itil v2. You will notice that the definition did not change much. Except the fact that these days in the modern world, service management is emphasizes a lot on the value. So service management is a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value for customers in the form of services, which requires understanding the nature of the value, the nature and scope of the stakeholders involved, and how value creation is enabled through their services. Itil is de facto IT service management and service management best practice, the top one in the world. It's not the only one, but is the one which reflects the most the service management practices. Now I would like to introduce you the concept of services and products. What is service actually? Again, their definition is not changing much from what we knew in the past, or maybe you heard it, except one thing. And you will notice this thing. Service is a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve without the customer having to manage specific costs and risks. The key word here is co-creation. We are not only creating value as a service provider, we are co-creating it, and we are co-creating it with our customers, with our users, with our stakeholders, and it's a major change which Itil 4 introduced, the concept of value co-creation. The services and organizations are based on one or more products, and here I will give you a small overview. What is the difference between service and the product? Here you see at the top is a supermarket experience where we go and we buy product. We have some budget, we pay the price, we do selection, we assume the cost of our service. And our service here is, let's say, their family dinner in the evening. And then we invest our labor in washing dishes, evidently, and we assume the risk as well if dinner goes wrong, or if the food is not tasty, or many other risks, right? So in their service domain, let's say restaurant experience, the provider, a restaurant, assumes costs and risks. And we are paying the price for it. That's the difference between the product and service. This is another sort of overview of the difference between services and products, and how products do participate in creation of the services. At the bottom, you see here the resources. Each organization has resources. Each service provider organization has resources, which is people, budgets, facilities, hardware, software, applications, and so on and so forth. All these resources do participate in creation of the product. And the products ultimately get into the service offerings, and value is delivered to the customers by services, via services. Well, if I would reverse this explanation, the services are using products to deliver value to the customers, okay, to the consumers. I will cover now the main service management concepts, this ITSM language, which I mentioned at the beginning. And the first one is, who are the stakeholders? We have three major stakeholders in service management, which are service provider, service consumer, and other stakeholders. Service provider is an organization which is provisioning the service. And organization can be as small as one person or as big as the whole organization, okay? So we always have to consider the scope and definition in this specific context, in this specific service. Who is an organization? It can be one team, can be, for example, infrastructure team, or it can be the whole IT department, or it can be just one person, let's say continual improvement manager who is providing a service of continual improvement. Service consumer is an organization which is consuming the service. Also important to mention here that the same organization can be both provider and a consumer in different contexts. And finally, other stakeholders, which are employees of the provider organizations, partners, suppliers, investors, shareholders, governments, lawmakers. There could be numerous stakeholders, and we always have to consider them. First, because they participate in a value co-creation. And secondly, we always need to remember the rule. You may forget about stakeholders, but stakeholders will not forget about you. In service management, consideration of stakeholders is extremely important. Service consumers further can be described as customer, user, and a sponsor. Customer is a person who defines requirements for a service. User, a person who uses the service. And the sponsor, a person who authorizes budget for service consumption. Here I can give you an example of, let's say, a parent buying their smartphone for the child, okay? Let's say mother is buying smartphone for the child. If mother buying smartphone for this child herself, she is a sponsor because she's committing budget. She's a customer because she defines requirements and parental control and data storage for the child, right? Data plan. And in this case, child is going to be a user. In the same situation, if their grandmother is buying their smartphone to the grandson, the grandmother is going to be a sponsor because she's committing a budget for purchase. However, the mother will still be a customer because she is still a parent, and she will define the requirements and the level of parental control and so on and so forth, and access to internet and whatever the requirements are. Child will still be a user. And in a third situation, the mother buying smartphone for herself. She is a customer, a user, and a sponsor. She's committing budget, she's defining requirements, and she's going to be using phone by herself. So why it's important to understand this difference? Because each of these roles is different, and they sometimes have conflicting expectation from the service. Users want it faster, better. Think about the child, about the smartphone, right? Their unlimited internet, unlimited data plan, and they want the support immediate. If something goes wrong with the service, they want to call the support desk and they want immediate response. Customers are really concerned with the requirements and outcomes of the service consumptions. Well, and sponsors most of the time are concerned with the budget and with the return on investment. And as I said, these roles might be caught in conflicting priorities. We need to understand them and we need to consider them. Here you've noticed the word outcomes. So let's take a look at what is outcome and what's the difference with the output. Very often in service management, we work towards output. We work towards our deadline, our service level, maybe immediate metrics, which we're measuring ourselves, any delivery. Their output is a tangible or intangible deliverable of any activity. However, each output is yielding in outcome. Outcome is towards service consumers. What the service consumers are doing with our output. For example, our systems, infrastructure, clouds, which we deliver, maintain, upgrade. This is our output. How it works for the outcome of, for example, the bank. Well, they're generating, evidently, they're serving their customers and generating some sort of the return on investment. Here I have so just an illustration of the concept outcome versus output. Do outcomes matter? It was brilliant surgery, excellent output. A shame that patient died. So patient died. Actually, this is an illustration of the outcome. In summary, their outcomes do matter. And going to my previous explanation of the responsibilities of the customer, it's a customer who is deciding on the requirements towards their outcomes and is responsible for ensuring that service is actually supporting the business outcomes. Here is a little bit more of the explanation of the concept of value and what value is consisting of. Value is, of course, about expected business outcomes. And by the way, when we're talking about business, we mean business in terms of operations of the company, what company does. It might be non-profit organization, it might be public, it might be government, it might be higher education. We broadly define it as business in terms of the business outcomes. The business outcomes are bringing the return on investment, or if we are in a government space, is improving some aspects of citizens' life, or it's improving the health of the patients and patient care, or educating students, and so on and so forth. These are all expected business outcomes. Outcomes can be, of course, most of the time in dollar value, even nonprofit, even public organizations, governments, municipalities, they count their outcomes in the dollar value, but also they can be non-tangible, as for example, health, safety, employee morale, for example, operational improvement. That could be also the outcome. However, as you see on this picture, their value is defined not only in terms of their expected business outcomes, but also by the preference and perception. These are two very important elements of the value, because value is perceived benefits, usefulness, and importance of something, and is a subject to perception of the stakeholders. If you think about your own personal conception of the service, for example, the bank, how did you choose your first bank? How do you choose when you switched the bank? You clearly had some sort of a preference from it, and maybe you got reference from your parents, or maybe you got reference from your colleagues or peers, or maybe friends, depending on the life cycle when the bank was chosen. And if you switched from one bank to another bank, it also was based on your preference. And now we have like more than 100 people here in this masterclass. And if we ask each of you, I can guarantee that each of you will have a different definition of the value of their banking service. That's the element of the value related to the preference. And by the way, in the domain of the preference, the value of the element of reference is a huge. So when we are referred by someone, their value goes up. Like if our friend referred us the bank, or if our neighbor referred us some airline, or our TripAdvisor or Google referred us via 5 stars the hotel and the vacation destination, the value in our perception goes up. This is very important to understand. And another element here is a perception. The value is in the eyes of beholder. Whatever we think about the value we bring as a service providers, it's only the beholder can define is there value for him or for her or not. It's only us who can say, did we like this hotel, this airline, this bank, this hairdresser? And if we go, for example, as a group to the restaurant, after consuming this service, each of us has their own definition of value and perception. One would say it's wonderful, another one would say, I didn't like it. And this is the truth. And this is where service provider organization should understand the nature of value and manage carefully their perceptions. The last thing to say about the value is that it changes over time. Well, unfortunately, this is the truth of life. Whatever we liked, for example, 6 years ago, 3 years ago, there's no value for us anymore. And the same is for organizations. Whatever our business customer was valuing just recently, stop being a value for him or for her, and the value is changing. Again, the key word is co-creation. The time when we were creating this service, or we thought we're creating this service, is in the past. Now we have to think in terms of the value co-creation and actively involve our customers and stakeholders in co-creation of the value. And now I will pass presentation to Olivier, who will talk about Itil Practices.
Thank you, Svetlana. Hello, everyone. My name is Olivier Abécassis. I'm an IT service management, business relationship management, and cybersecurity executive consultant at Itil Chapter. I do have a set of certifications in the domain of IT service management, and I am an ITIL expert. I am an ITIL management professional, as well as Six Sigma Black Belt, PMP in the domain of project management. I'm a certified business relationship manager, and in cyber resilience, I'm a Resilia practitioner. My domain is specialized in IT service management, automation, and security. I will walk you through the different management practices that ITIL 4 is bringing us in order to be able to use in our various organizations. Now, let me point the difference between what practices are and what processes are. We are familiar with practices in the domain of medicine, such as medical practice, or law for legal practice. Well, actually, ITIL 4 is bringing that same concept to the domain of IT management. Meaning that from an IT management standpoint, a practice is a set of organizational resources that are designed to perform work or accomplish an objective. And we group these resources into 4 dimensions of service management. Dimension 1 is about organization and people, right? Dimension 2 is about information and technology. Dimension 3 about partners and suppliers. And the last one, dimension 4, is about value streams and processes. What ITIL 4 tells us is that we need these 4 dimensions in order to properly perform and provide a service management. Now, compared to practices, what is a process? Well, think about the business processes, going to the bank, doing some money transfer. That's a business process. Same with IT. Now, a process is actually a set of activities that are transforming input, such as information, into output. And of course, we need more details about how to execute these processes. And that's where come the procedures comes into the picture. And these procedures, they outline who is involved in the process. They tell us what are the work instructions, perform that process using some tools and so on and so forth. And of course, these are practices, which are actually 34 of them in ITIL 4, are executed via processes. Usually we find between 2 and 3 processes per practice. Now, let me get you to what the ITIL 4 practices are. ITIL 4 segmented these practices into 3 categories: the general management practices, the service management practices, and the technical one. In the general management practices, we find what is usually necessary for an organization to function, such as strategy, architecture, relationship. For those of you familiar with the version 3 of ITIL, we used to call it business relationship management. Now it's called relationship management. It's broader. Risk management, portfolio management. How do we take decision on which new product, which new service to invest for, or which projects are we deciding to let go or to actually invest in a near or long-term future? Happening in portfolio management. Service financial management, where this is where we do account for the services, we do budgeting, we invoice for the services or the product we provide. This is all happening in the service financial management practice. Project management practice, well, now we are familiar. It used not to be in ITIL v3, it's now in ITIL 4. Information security management, still there. Supplier management, how do we manage our strategic or tactical or operational suppliers. It's happening and described into this very specific practice. Workforce and talent management. This is a new one. How do we manage our HR? How do we make sure that we integrate the proper practices to make sure that we have the right resources for delivering our services and products? Knowledge management, I used to be there in Itil v3, still there. Organizational change management. That practice is a new one in Itil 4, making sure that we have the means, the communication plan, the proper change agents in order to adopt the new services that we are providing to our clientele. Continual improvement, it used to be called CSI, for continual service improvement. Now it's more broad and named as continual improvement. And the last one in the general management section is the measurement and reporting. On the service management practice side, so this one is very focused on how do we manage our services. The first one, which is a new one, is covering the business analysis. Second one is about service design. How do we design the services and to make sure that they are going to fulfill the expectations of our clients? The third one is still there from Itil v3 is the availability management, making sure that we have the levels of availability that are expected from our clients. Capacity and performance management, still there. Service continuity management, making sure that the services and the product that we provide, we provide them on a continuous basis, even though some major issues might strike. We still have continuity in the services that we provide. Service level management, how do we meet the expectations which are documented, for example, in the service level agreements of our clients. Service catalog management, well, pretty much showing in a catalog what are the services which are available to consume and or the one which are in the pipeline. Change enablement, this practice used to be called change management. Now the new denomination is encompassing all the aspects that we need to manage to do some changes, such as making sure that we have the proper level of risk, that we have the authority, and that we have the proper calendar, right? So this is within the change enablement practice. Another one, which is very complementary to the previous one, is about release management. It used to be in so-called one process called release and deployment management. Now it's separated in two: release management on one side and deployment management on the other side, as you will see later in the technical management practices. And that was actually asked by many IT service management professionals to be able to distinguish the two, because release is before and deployment happens after. IT asset management and service configuration management used to be one process. Now it's separated in two. On the asset side, we make sure that we acquire and account and have all the legal aspects to manage our IT assets. On the service configuration management practice, we make sure that we have all the information to properly manage our services. So two different practices. Service validation and testing is still there from Itil version 3, the same as the one for the operation regarding incident management, problem management, service request management, and a new one called the monitoring and event management, where we actually see how do we manage every event coming out from our environments and infrastructure in scope. And the last one, which used to be a function in Itil version 3, is the service desk practice. Now, on the last section for the technical management practice, we find the deployment portion, because it's actually a very down-to-earth practical activity where we actually deploy the releases which were authorized by the change enablement practice. And two new ones, infrastructure and platform management, and of course the software development and management. So these are the 34 practices which are brought to us by the new version of Itil 4. And now I'm going to illustrate and take an example of one of them. And before getting there, I want to share with you how do you get these practices to you. Now, the beauty of Itil 4 is that all these 34 practices, and of course way more information, are made available to you. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to download them. They're all coming into a PDF format using Axelos portal, which is called My Axelos, My Itil. And this is a 1-year subscription, which costs 50 British pounds to get access to. And once you have access to it, you can download pretty much everything you need out of these 34 practices in a PDF format. Now, if you take Itil 4 courses with us, and you pass the exam, you have access for free for 1 year to all these very useful content that you can download, then reuse, adopt, and then adapt to your, actually to adapt first and then adopt within your organization. So you don't have to start from scratch, just reuse the best practices and then make them yours. This being said, I would like to, as an example, illustrate what kind of information, what kind of valuable information can we extract from one of these practices, and I will illustrate that with the Itil 4 release management practice. And this is, as you can see, some pictures of what you can actually get from that Itil 4 My Axelos, My Itil website. As you can see here, IT asset management, project management, service financial management, measurement and reporting, etc. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's all there. So now let's go to the release management practice and see what's inside such document that you can just reuse. And as I mentioned before, adapt and then adopt for your organization. Management Itil 4 practice guide is fairly recent. That one was published on 11th of January 2020. It comes in the form of a PDF. You have 30 pages, and it's pretty much structured alongside the same way for all the practices. You have some general information, which I will show you later, and then we see again these 4 dimensions that I was mentioning before. First one about the value streams and processes, then the dimension around organizations and people, where, for example, we have job descriptions and role, not job descriptions, roles descriptions, and how they fit into that practice. Very valuable information. Then how do we integrate this release management into information and technology? What kind of IT or automation do we need to execute that practice? Then how does that affect partners and suppliers? All right, so let's go to the document content and see how we can actually reuse this information. So first of all, we have some general information about the practice. In the case of the release management, we see what is the purpose of that release management practice. Then we have some definitions about the key terms and concepts. As you can see, no need to reinvent that. It's all there. We have just to copy, paste, and then adapt to our own organization. So what is a release? Well, typically a version of a service or any other configuration item or a collection of configuration items that is made available for use. And then you have some more details beneath. Then we have some other key concepts brought to us, which is now in the modern way of DevOps and agility, the CI/CD concept, how do they work with release management? CI standing for continuous integration, and CD standing for continuous delivery, and the other CD standing for continuous deployment. So how do they interact with the release management practice? Then we have the definition, the mentioning of the release models. What is the release unit? So for those of you who are familiar or who were familiar with the release and deployment management process back in Itil v3, well, same concepts are here and the definitions are the same. The push-pull, the hypothesis, and so on. Then we have the scope of the practice, right? So all of these elements, you can just take it, and whenever you document release management process guide, you would be able to use that from the get-go. Here you have also the way that the activities of release management do interface with others. And this is valid for all the practices. You have a means to see how the practices are depending from each other. And of course, here you see dependencies with change enablement, deployment management, software development, etc. Then you have the success factor of your practice. No need to invent them, they're all there. This is very valuable information, and this will save you a lot of time when you will be designing your practice and your processes. You just have to reuse them and pick and choose the one which are valuable for you and which makes sense in your organization. All right, the key metrics, right? All there. Now, of course, you will have to make sure that these key metrics, which we know as key performance indicators, would be able to fit into your organization. So you would have to choose the, let's say, 3 or 5 best ones, but still they are there. No need to scratch one's head, just pick and choose. Then we have the references to the value stream. And of course, what are the processes that are pertinent to that practice? In this case, release management. So typically here, that in the release management practice, we have one process called release planning, right? And you even have the workflow that you can design from. And then you have all the details about each and every activity that is happening into this release planning process. Same with the release coordination. And then you have all the details of the activities that are happening, who are the key inputs, which are the key inputs, which are the key outputs, and how the roles are interacting with this practice. So typically in this example, one practice, 2 processes. And of course, then you have all the roles that are going to be involved into executing and making sure that this practice is working properly. In the case of the release management practice, you have the description of the release manager role here, all there. And you can see each and every role, how they are involved into executing that practice, right? So the definition and the information is very valuable. And you will be able to start from there, meaning that you don't start from scratch. You have a very good best practice that you can leverage from and apply to your organization. And then you have information about the way the practice is going to be executed using information and technology. How do tools come into play when the organization is actually performing release management? Right? So automation and tooling. Okay. And at the end, you have mentioning about how partners and suppliers do contribute to the release management and what do you expect from them to be able to be performing with your release management practice. And at the end of each and every practice, you will see this reminder. This is common to all of them, where you have the 7 guiding principles of ITIL, which is given to you. And you are able to use them and make sure that when you design your release management practice or any practice, you do not go against these 7 guiding principles. All right, so I hope that you appreciated this presentation of the Itil management practices, what they are, the 34 of them. Of course, if you want more details, don't hesitate to reach out. We will be happy to help you with those. Thank you very much, and I will give back the microphone to Svetlana Sidenko.
Thank you, Olivier. It summarizes very well all the information about Itil practices and where to find them, how to use them, what's the value of them, how practices are related to the processes and how it all works together. And now I'm passing microphone to Xalani Nguena, who will introduce himself now.
Thank you, Svetlana, and thanks to everyone for participating on the call today. We're really pleased to have so many people participating on the call on this webinar, which is just great. Thank you again. So my name is Xalani Nguena. I work for the Harvard Business School in Boston. I'm a director of IT service delivery within the Office of the CIO. So today I'll be talking to you about the service value system, the service value chain. And I'll share some thoughts as well on how you can make this actionable within your organization. The purpose of the SVS, the service value system, well, firstly, the Itil 4 architecture has been designed to provide an overall holistic perspective of IT service management capabilities. And at the core of that architecture is the service value system, otherwise known as SVS. It illustrates this holistic view, right, of service management. It acknowledges that all the IT management capabilities we perform are part of an integrated value system. It represents how all components, the activities, the resources of an organization work together, right, to facilitate value creation. And another interesting thing is that the SVS design is very much influenced by lean thinking models and practices, right, which have a focus on understanding the holistic or big picture aspects of the total value system. And it promotes this continuous flow and improvement of the work necessary to support that customer value as well. And there are huge benefits, right, in viewing the organization as a system because it can provide these insights, which otherwise you wouldn't get or they wouldn't be visible when you're analyzing their individual components. Now, when we look at the nuts and bolts of this service value system, there are different components there that we need to take a look at, dissect. We're getting our demand from various sources, external and internal. As we take in that demand, we are processing it through our service value chain activities, and you're using those resources that we have in the organization to process that demand and create value for our organization internally, our customers, and all our stakeholders, right? And in the SVS, if we start looking now at the other different aspects there, we start with the guiding principles. And these help to guide us in the way we work, the way we plan, regardless of changes in our strategies, in our goals, in the type of work, or even in the way we are organized, right? The organization structure as well, the management structure. And you'll see when you reference these guiding principles, you'll see them reflected in many other frameworks, in other standards, methods. You look at DevOps, you'll see some of them there. Agile, you see some of them there, right? And they're meant to be referenced, right? Reference them whenever you need to make some decision on your day-to-day work, or whenever you need to prioritize, or whenever you are faced with a situation where there is, dispute, or over something, you are able to utilize these to resolve those as well. When we move on to the governance portion, like good parenting, governance sets the rules of how we operate to achieve our goals, right? So if we are looking at another way of defining it using the COVID lens of evaluate, direct, and monitor, it pretty much translates, to keeping what IT does aligned with the value proposition that the business wants. And then we move on to the centerpiece, which is at the core of the SVS, is the service value chain. We'll cover this in much more detail later, but this is the operating model, right, that provides the organizational guidance, right, to support this value generation within the organization. And then supporting that and underpinning all of that value generation and value creation are the different practices, 34 of them in Itil 4, which are drawn from different industry domains, right? And they underpin and support these value chain activities. So they must really tightly work together to deliver value across the service value system, right? The key message here, again, being integration. And then you have your continual improvement, which ensures that the organization adapts to changing business needs, all forms of transformation, and it maintains or increases the value which is generated by its service value system as well. Basically, making sure things are getting better over time, right? So as we conclude on this service value system, really the key takeaway is value creation through integration, right? So without governance, you lose direction, you lose focus and alignment. Without the practices, standard practices for that matter, you have complexity and you have variability in the way you work, right? You may end up having multiple ways of doing one thing. Without improvement, right, you have entropy, right? Your business dies, right? Without any new improvements to the entire system as well. So any human system any human design system or process eventually deteriorates. It decays, right? If no energy is put into improving it. That's why we should continually improve the way we work, our organization as well. Now, moving on to challenges of silos, right? So unfortunately, most IT organizations struggle with a silo mentality, right? Regarding culture, regarding processes, and the tools that we use as well, right? So, if you look at the way organizations are, by their very nature, they are created out of a siloed structure, right? We are all organized around departments, around groups, around units. So it is natural that we end up following those sort of like siloed structures. But what is really important is that we need to be bridging, right, those silos, right, to improve the way we work, to improve velocity, right, of delivering a value within the organization, right? So we need to acknowledge that all IT management capabilities that we perform are part of an integrated value system. So as we manage these multiple service management initiatives or projects or any sort of initiative in an organization, the leadership needs to create this sense of shared values, beliefs, practices, and it's also everyone's responsibility, right, to actively seek to resolve this silo mentality in an organization regarding its culture processes, right? So the key takeaway here is if we focus only on optimizing individual components in a siloed way, we'll fail to deliver the value, or potentially we can create localized improvements, right, that have adverse impact on other aspects of the system and can detract from the overall system objectives as well, right? So siloed organizations, they cannot act quickly, right, to take advantage of new opportunities. We can't optimize, right, the use of our resources. And also one key thing about, bridging these silos is, as you design your practices, you need to make sure that that thinking, right, of the silo mentality is actually that it is not reflected in your practices, right? So we must avoid practices becoming those, siloed again. What we need to do is to create integration points, right, between those practices as we design them and as we also use them on a day-to-day basis. Now we'll move on to the value chain, right? Now you remember, the value chain is at the center, is at the core of the service value system. There's a fun fact here about the value chain. The value chain as a concept actually was first described and made popular by Michael Porter in the 1980s. It's actually, and Michael Porter is a business professor at Harvard Business School, where I work, and one of the world's most influential thinkers on management and competitiveness, right? So this is not really a new concept coming with Itil 4, but it's actually borrowed from the business domain as well. So when we look at the value chain, the service value chain, now every service delivery organization has an objective, right, to co-create value with its customers, with its partners, with its stakeholders. Now, the service value chain model provides that organizational guidance, right, to support this value creation across its many activities, right? So at a macro level, again, at a macro level, we take in the demand, for new services, or even changed or modified services, and we efficiently and effectively supply those demands based on business priority and direction, using a combination of different activities and different practices as well. So on the outside of that service value chain shell, you would see there is plan, right? So through planning, we create this shared understanding of how work will be organized, how work will be managed, allowing contributors to understand their roles and responsibilities and to coordinate and collaborate effectively and efficiently, right, as we discharge our duties. We handle our interactions through the engage activity, right? And those interactions could be both internal and they could be external. We move on to perform requirements analysis, right? Business analysis, and develop new and improved services as well through the design and transition activity. When we look at sourcing, right, different resources that we need in the value chain, we do that through the obtain and build activity. We provision services, right, and provide help and information as well through the delivery and support. And improve, once again, is for improvement at all levels, right? So organizations create also, in addition to this, service value streams, right, which actually carry out specific tasks or respond to particular situations. So you may have this operating model defined, but to actually make it actionable, now you need to create service value streams, right? So you may have a value stream of how to build a new application. You may have a value stream of how to introduce new features. You may have a value stream of how to respond to major incidents, right? And a key takeaway, as we conclude on this service value chain slide is that every complex value system has a natural flow to it, right? And to understand that flow, we need to rediscover the end-to-end supply chain and understand how all those pieces fit together and how we use all these activities in our value chain, right, to generate that value. Now, another thing to point out, which is really quite important, is that the Itil 4 service value chain, it enables organizations to map and measure how various value streams flow through the system, right? Interacting with different practices to support the goal of value delivery, right? This allows us to clearly see the flow. So as we take in the demand, it allows us to clearly see the flow of value through the organization and use that end-to-end visibility and appropriate controls, right, to continually improve the flow, but most importantly, to deliver the value. And as you move through the service value chain, as I alluded to before, pointed out before, is that you utilize all sorts of, you may have multiple value streams for delivering different types of value. And within those value streams, you may be utilizing one or more practices. But also, you may be moving across different groups, different layers of the organization as well, as you generate that value throughout the organization. So another thing here is that the value chain activities themselves, they use different combinations, right? As I mentioned, of Itil practices. Now, each activity may draw upon as well internal or third-party resources, processes, skills, and competencies from one or more of these practices. There are certain, there are common rules, though, that you need to establish, right, as you move through, as you utilize this operating model, right? So common rules such as, as we take in any incoming and outgoing interaction, right? We perform them through Engage, whether you are actually soliciting requirements with your customer, or you're providing support, right, at the service desk. You actually perform that through Engage. Planning, it's at all levels in the organization, and that could be at strategic, it could be at tactical planning, it could be at operational planning as well. All new resources that we bring in for our value generation, they are obtained through the obtain and build, right? This is where you can also make decisions around, buy versus build, right? And all improvements, again, and this is really important to mention, is that it's at all levels, right, that are made to improve. It's not at the end when you have delivered value that you should be thinking about improvement. On every activity, every piece of work that we do, you should embed, continual improvement. Whether we are designing a new application, whether we are, we are soliciting requirements, or whether we are actually transitioning or deploying the service. Whatever practices that we use, the activities that we carry, we need to be thinking about those improvement opportunities. We bring them through again through the value chain, make sure that we actually address the issues that are uncovered through those activities or through those practices. Now, this is a practitioner view, and that's what I call a practitioner view of an operating model. From my experience, is when I'm redefining it in a way that is applicable to an organization or my organization. Pretty much the operating model is turning the what into the how and the where, right? The operating model is pretty much a visual representation of an organization that determines how, using people, process, technology, it delivers the value described by the strategy, and then this means it turns the what into the how, those improvements to support value co-creation with its customers. In other words, it's a blueprint of the IT value chain process architecture, and it's agnostic to existing organizational structure and sourcing strategies. Like, the purpose is to provide that high-level view. It gives this holistic orientation, right? It supports also a shared understanding of how and where, and it does not provide detailed process steps for each function. And I did mention this before. This is where now you would have to go on and identify those journeys in your organization, create value streams for them to actually support your operating model. And it does not reflect an organizational structure as much as the SVS talks about the integration of the organization as an entire system. Now, I'll conclude by showing an example of a service operating model. And, how do you make the service value chain actionable in an organization? Or you would have to come up with your own definition or your own architecture of an operating model that's applicable for your own business, right? And this is where really the rubber hits, the road pretty much in terms of taking the high level and then adding on, to that operating model, the various pieces that really make it much more actionable, right? So this sort of operating model provides the required service orientation and automation focus for products and services, right? And when you take a look here, under the bandit opportunity as an example, you have all sorts of requests. Those requests could be coming from your customers, and those requests could be, operational IT demand, right? And through your engage, there are certain activities that you may be carrying out in your organization, such as, operational needs, getting to understand what those needs are, reviewing them, auditing them. You could have maintenance needs. Again, you're using Engage to fully understand, and this is where you also get to understand what the resource commitments would be required as well. And, on top of that, on the top layer, you'll see plan and governance activities. Now, obviously, in your organization, you have all different types of governance activities. In this particular organization, there are certain ones, right? So PRB, as an example, is one that I can point out there, which is pretty much your project review board, right? You could be doing some quarterly planning. You could be doing some IT prioritization committee that you may have. You may be producing your maintenance plans, right? Your capacity planning. So you'd have to think about the different sorts of governance activities that you actually have. And those governance activities could be at different stages of the operating model as well. At the bottom, as you can see, we can't talk more enough about improving, your entire service value system, and in this particular case, your value chain. Every activity must have improvement, continual improvement embedded in it. You would have other, practices that pretty much underpin your value chain, underpin your operating model, such as risk management, right? Where risk is pretty much everyone's responsibility, right? For participating and contributing to risk management, right? Managing risk should really be habitual. It should be a habit that everybody does. You have your knowledge management, you capture knowledge at every aspect of the operating model as well, right? And as you go through the chevron, the centerpiece there of all those, so those are your pretty much your service value chain activities, right? So from engage, you go into your design. And this is where now you may start thinking about, what are the main components of your design activities. So this is where you start thinking about, your agile teams, your project management, whether you're using agile or other, your obtain and build. And you'll see that some of these activities, they are very much iterative, right? So your obtain, build, update is something that, and your design as well. It's very pretty much iterative work. We've gone through transitioning into our different controlled environments, whether, we're now going into our live environments, and again, delivering support where we can utilize all sorts of different practices there to support incident management, problem management, responding to major incidents. And lastly, once we get to our service service of value to customer, we shouldn't forget about getting feedback, all sorts of feedback. It could be supply performance feedback, it could be customer feedback. But again, we need also to be referencing our agreements that we have with our different stakeholders, such as service level agreements and operating level agreements. This concludes it. It's pretty much an example. In your organization, you may have a much more detailed one. It might not have all of these activities, but just wanted to show an example of how an operating model could potentially look like in an organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Ksalani. Thank you for sharing with us your knowledge and specifically the real life case of implementation of value chain and, well, actually how it might look like in real organization. And on this note, we will move now to the period of live questions and answers. Please don't hesitate to start sending us your questions. Welcome all the panelists, Ksalani, Giovanna, hi everyone. So thank you. And can you please confirm you can hear me?
Yeah, can hear you, Svetlana.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I see here the questions. So the number one is what new dimensions does this holistic or systemic view brings to Itil that wasn't considered before? That's question to Ksalani.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look traditionally, right, at how ITIL and pretty much other frameworks have been so much focused on in the past is the notion of quality, right, as the centerpiece or the main component of measurement, right? So if you remember in ITIL 3, when we talk about utility, we're looking at the functional requirements, and when you look at the warranty aspect, you're looking at the non-functional requirements. But what this holistic, view in ITIL 4, which is largely, and I did mention this in the presentation as well, is largely influenced by lean thinking and this systems thinking. Pretty much what it does now, it brings this concept of velocity, right? So speed with direction. So it includes the speed at which we process that value or how that value flows through the system, right? And as well as if you look at the component, at the cost component as well for delivering that value based on other alternatives. So really, it's all about this understanding, the value system, and then being able to analyze that system, right? Where an organization can experience issues with how the flow or issues with the flow and velocity in which we process that value throughout our operating model activities.
Thank you, Ksalani. So there's another question here. What is the difference between change management and change enablement? Well, I guess the change management from our previous knowledge of ITIL v3 and traditional one, and the new one, change enablement in ITIL 4. That's question to Olivia.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So typically, well, in change management, former ITIL v3, it became more administrative. Some may say even red tape. Now, in the new change enablement, the idea behind is that it's way more agile, has velocity, automation, risks is evaluated upfront. We collect authorizations on the flow, and typically calendars, which were already there in v3, are shared with anyone in the organization. So typically, and even some organization may abandon even the change advisory board, the famous CAB, to go for on-the-flow authorization. In that sense, enabling a velocity and faster improvement of changes. So that's the idea behind.
Okay, so I guess there's another question to you here. What is the difference between release and deployment management? It used to be the same process in ITIL v3, and now they are separated.
Yeah. Actually, the profession of IT service management was for quite a while confused between the two, and asked for that separation to happen. So release is before. So basically, when putting together packaging features, making sure that we have a process supporting the practice to create these versions of a new software, for example. Once agreed and once authorized by the change enablement, then it's handed to a more technical practice, which consists of deploying either in waves or by a push or a pull, whichever is better. Deploying technically that release into the controlled environments. So that's why now it's really separated.
Yeah. Thank you. So the question is about implementation of Itil. I believe that would be Toksalani. Any guidance on best approach for building a case for change for implementing an Itil-based IT operating model when leadership doesn't think it's a priority? Wow, that's a hot topic.
Yeah, it's a hot topic. It's very, and it's a very good question, right? Because obviously, first of all, I think from an organization's perspective, building a case for change brings quite a lot of challenges, right? It could be a very expensive exercise on one hand, right? Organizations today, they are pretty much inundated with all sorts of pressures coming from the business, all sorts of projects and so on. So it can always be difficult to make a case for that. But I think we should always go back to what problem are you trying to solve, right? So it is really very important to articulate what the pain points of an organization are and be able to articulate on how those pain points are preventing you from delivering the value that you need at a pace that the business wants as well, right? So we need to really go back and be very collaborative, particularly on this nature. So my experience has been that when you're making the case for change, be as inclusive. So go back to your 7 guiding principles, right? One of them is, collaborate and promote, visibility. You focus on the value, right? So think again about this holistic. So in terms of, if we are making a case for change, the problem maybe is, and especially now, which is very interesting in the new world that we are living in right now, there's all sorts of pressures, right? People feel, they are, inundated with lots of work. Well, so is it a capacity issue, right, that we are having? And how do we make a case for actually resolving that? So now we start no longer looking at our individual, aspects and the way we work. It's about how one particular piece of an activity actually influences mine. So again, just to conclude, very short, I think you really need to make sure that there is that clear understanding of the different pain points and how those prevent you from actually working. And most importantly, of course, and most people would know this, obviously, you would need some sort of like organizational change management plan, right? Change is difficult, and human adaptability to change is very slow. Technology moves way faster than us as human beings adapting to change. So it's a topical issue, but you need to look at the problems that you're trying to solve, make sure that you have a good way to articulate that.
Thank you, Xalani. And the last question before the break, very quickly, how does deployment management relate to change release management processes? What are typical activities of deployment management?
I can take that one. So typically, when we talk about the activities, for sure, deployment versus change enablement. So when you authorize changes or releases, this is change enablement. When you make sure that the services and the components are live, in the live environments available to users, this is release management. However, in terms of activities per se in the process of deployment, so you have typically 5 of them, right? So you have deployment planning, you have verification of the service components, you have verification of your target environment, then you execute your deployment, and then at the very end, you have the deployment verification. So pretty much in the practice, you have one process which has 5 activities, and each of these activities is pretty much very much detailed.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. On this note, we will go now to a short break, and after the break, Giovanna and Costa, who will join us now, they will share the practices, the actual practices of Itil. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Now we start Itil 4 Masterclass Part 2. And in this part of our Masterclass, the Itil practitioners will share with you the knowledge and also the theory of Itil 4 about Itil 4 practices, selected practices. We've selected 6 practices to share with you. And before I move on to pass the microphone to Itil practitioners, I would like to share with you the video about their main concepts of their Itil 4, which we learned in the part 1 of this masterclass.
Itil 4, Connecting Key Concepts. Itil 4, the latest evolution of Itil, provides a holistic way for IT professionals and organizations around the world to co-create value in the modern service economy. All organizations have resources that need to be configured to create products that offer value to potential consumers. From these products, the organization creates service offerings, which are designed to address the needs of consumers or consumer segments, such as quality and price. By doing so, the organization acts as a service provider. Other organizations or individuals acting as service consumers choose the service offering that best suits their needs. They enter a service relationship to interact with the provider, which in turn generates or co-creates value for the consumer and provider. For example, a bank might create a mobile banking app for customers, but value is only co-created when the customer uses the app to pay bills or transfer money, which generates data and possibly transaction fees for the bank. Value can be shared among multiple stakeholders, for example, the provider, the consumer, suppliers, and potentially regulators and tax authorities. In turn, these stakeholders exert influence or constraints on the service provider. We can describe these using the pestle model. Political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors can impact the way the service provider manages its work and resources. Itil 4 provides a model to describe the organization's resources, the 4 dimensions of service management. These dimensions, organizations and people, value streams and processes, partners and suppliers, and information and technology do not exist in isolation. They overlap and interact with each other. For example, the bank needs to create appropriate management oversight to manage the data generated by its app. This requires training users on how to manage data assets, processes to deal with incidents and requests, and the required tools and technologies. At the same time, they should ensure their partners and suppliers comply with the bank's requirements. By managing the 4 dimensions, the organization can leverage the Service Value System Model, or SVS, that describes the various organizational components of the service provider. These components are guiding principles, governance, the service value chain, practices, and the continual improvement of the whole system. The guiding principles, together with continual improvement, can help the organization align their IT service management with lean and agile frameworks. In the middle of the SVS, we have the service value chain, which is a set of loosely connected value chain activities, which convert consumer demand into valuable products and services. Practices support and contribute to value chain activities. Practices are an evolution of the Itil version 3 processes and are structured using the 4 dimensions model. A sequence of value chain activities designed to meet the needs of a specific scenario is called a value stream, which results in a functioning product or service. For example, the bank has a value stream that maps the activities needed to design, develop, and release new app functionality. Another value stream maps the activities needed to support user complaints. Each value stream may include different activities, but each one starts with opportunity or demand and ends with value derived from products and services. Techniques like value stream mapping can help to optimize the value stream before the organization considers automating repeatable tasks. In order to design and run a new value stream, the organization should consider these key concepts of Itil 4. And by adopting these key concepts together, organizations can create a flexible and effective architecture that delivers world-class IT-enabled services. Welcome to the future of Itil.
Well, welcome to the future of Itil. That was quite a high-level summary of everything in Itil 4. And now we're moving to actual Itil 4 practices. Olivia already shared with you all the information about the Itil 4 practices. Just to remind you, the practices which we're covering today is service level management, change management, incident management, problem management, service request management, and service desk. I will pass a microphone now to Costa Samaras, an Itil expert, Itil managing professional, and also he's a practitioner. He is working in the field of IT service management for a while now. He will introduce himself now.
Thanks, Svetlana. I'm Costa Samaras. I'm an Itil 4 expert and managing professional. I currently work for a company in the Montreal area. It's a fintech company that I work for, and I'm a ITSM practice manager at that company. So what I'm going to go through is just 3 of the Itil 4 practices, specifically the service desk, incident management, and change enablement. We're going to start first with the service desk. And the service desk is a dedicated group of people who act as the single point of contact for all users on a daily basis. So if you have an IT issue or you want to solve something, or even if you have a question, that's the group that you typically interface with. The service desk tends to be the face of IT to our users, and that's why they're very important to the overall IT service within an organization. They handle things from incidents, so when something's broken, to a request where somebody needs something new, and they even handle general how-to questions or informational questions that come through to them. Things that come through the service desk can come through either by phone, email, or some sort of web interaction. So the primary aim of a service desk is to restore service, or I should say normal service, to users as quickly as possible. This could involve using a workaround to resolve an incident, fulfilling a service request, or even answering a simple or even complex question. One thing that we tend to overlook within a service desk is that communication is a critical success factor. Really, what we mean by that is the way that we communicate with people, the way that they receive the message, is how we determine if we're doing a good job or not. And to make sure that we're sending that right message, we have to make sure that the sender, the person who's actually communicating to the person, is talking to that person in a language that they understand, and they're checking for that understanding to make sure that the receiver is receiving that message. So not only does the sender have to make sure that the intended outcome of the message has been achieved, but we also have to make sure that the receiver, the person who's receiving that message, understands that message. And I think this can be summarized by just a know your audience type of way of thinking. So if just as you don't speak to your children the same way you speak to your colleagues or your manager, you have to know who you're speaking with when you're on the phone with somebody and or even exchanging emails with people. You have sometimes technical people and less technical people. Make sure you're tailoring your message to that person in a way that they will understand. The reason I'm bringing that up is because in a service desk, the people that you want to hire, the people you want to have on your service desk have to have that emotional intelligence to interpret the needs of the people who are calling. Make sure that they understand what they're looking for and what they're trying to get out of the call. There's no point getting into a call and going into all the technical jargon with somebody who really just wants to get back to work and just wants to have their incident resolved or whatever their how-to is. They just want to have that answer. So make sure that you're tailoring your message and you're conveying the message that the customer needs to hear in order to get back to what they need to want to, in order to get back to what they want to be able to do. Some modern service desk trends that we've seen over the past few years. The first one is a shift left approach, also used to be known or sometimes is known as the 3-2-1-0 or 0 approach, where we're trying to take our work and move it more and more to the left. And by that, what we mean is move it from a level 3 position to a level 2, level 2 to level 1, and level 1 to level 0. Level 0 is where the customer is doing the work themselves. Not only is that better for us from a support perspective, but customers tend to like to figure things out on their own and not have to call or email or do whatever they need to do. So wherever possible, we try to move or shift left, try to move stuff to a lower level and have the customers work on their resolutions themselves. Another trend is the use of social media. This is where I think something that's old became new again. So these community forums that we have seem to be popular again. Twitter as a way of communicating with your users. If there's a big outage or you want to communicate a change that's going to happen, there's different tools that we use and can use and are using these days to make sure our messages get across to people, either as a push or a pull type message. The third bullet here talks about using a familiar, intuitive, and clear user interface. The example I'd like to use here is Amazon. Just as Amazon does not have a user guide, neither should your interface. So when you start, Amazon's a very successful company and there's no user guide. People just tend to pick it up, go to amazon.com or .ca and do their shopping, and they're able to get what they need from Amazon without having to read a user guide. That's the goal we're trying to get to, or we should all be trying to get to, is using a GUI or an interface that doesn't require people to have to read through help documentation. The next bullet talks about machine learning. So using chatbots, for example, is a common example of where some things can be done by at a lower level. So if you have a chatbot who can answer people's questions, that sometimes does help with restoring service or answering simple questions, or at least the preliminary steps, like maybe enablement questions to make sure that they're entitled, to the service. And then another thing that seems to work within machine learning is automatically routing tickets to the right group. So just as I said, shifting left, moving down to the lower level makes more sense. Sometimes skipping a level makes sense too. So if you're a level 1 technician, for example, you know that they can't solve it or they shouldn't be able to solve it because, let's say, it's a security type issue, and you know those types of questions always need to go to your information security group. There's no point sending it to a level 2 group or a level 3 group if you know it ultimately has to go to the InfoSec group. So where you can bypass some of the process, some of the groups, and send it directly to the group who can work on that task, you're better off. So this is where machine learning really can pay off, where you can teach it to say, well, these types of tickets should always go to, for example, the InfoSec group and bypass everyone else. And then lastly, we have tech bars. So I think this became popular, especially with Apple, with the Genius bars that they had or still have. This day and age with COVID, things are a little bit different. So no one really wants to have that human interaction. But before COVID, before we all went into lockdown into our own homes, it was becoming more and more popular where people would like to go bring their laptop or their machine or whatever it was and ask questions to somebody who knows what they're doing. And really having that human interaction was becoming popular again. So again, this is an example of things that were old that became new again. So if you've been around long enough to remember the old days of help desks, where people would actually walk up to someone and get help, this became popular and was becoming more and more popular as time went on. Next practice we're going to cover is incident management. So that's really my specialty. My specialty is within incident management. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in into this practice than even the last one. So the purpose of incident management is to minimize the negative impact of incidents by restoring normal service operation as quickly as possible. The way we do that is by detecting and recording or registering these incidents, diagnosing and investigating these incidents, trying to restore the service as quickly as possible, managing the incident records to make sure we have a good record of what happened, communicating. So as I said in the previous slides, communication is key. So incident management isn't only about restoring service as quickly as possible, it's also about communicating with the relevant stakeholders about what's going on, what happened, and so on. And then lastly, feeding that process, feeding the incident management data into other practices like problem management or into your CMDB if you need to. So, or into your change management practice or change enablement practice. All that stuff comes out of incident management. Really what happens with incident management is it's your fail-safe for everything else. So if your change enablement process isn't working right, your release management process isn't working right, your CMDB isn't working well, or isn't factored in well, then chances are it'll come out in the incident management process. The incident management process is where we all have to pay to make sure that things are working properly and where we find we had the most problems. So just some key terms within this. First of all, you'll notice that this is called the incident management practice, not the incident management process. That's a change from Itil v3. So in Itil 4, our processes became practices, and that's not just a naming change. There's a change to why they call it a practice. So a practice is really the envelope or the wrapper that includes not only the process, those inputs and outputs that you used to get that you get in a process. So not only does it include the process within the practice, but it also includes the organizational resources needed to perform the work or accomplish the objective. So if again, if you're familiar with Itil v3 more than Itil 4, a practice is more similar to what we used to call in v3 a function. And not to cause too much confusion here, but really a practice is the overall how we perform the work plus the capabilities that go into that all feed into that practice. So that's one of the changes, major changes that you'll notice with Itil 4. So again, an incident is an unplanned interruption to an IT service or reduction in the quality of an IT service. That's what that second bullet says. And then the third bullet talks about incident models. So whenever you're running an incident management practice, you have to make sure that your approach is standardized. So you know who your level 1s are, your level 2s, how does it get from level 1 to level 2, what are your escalation paths, what are your communication paths. That's all goes into your incident model. A major incident is an incident that requires much quicker than normal restoration times. So those are pretty much your priority 1 and priority 2 incidents, depending on how many priority levels you have. But these are the highest priority incidents, fall into that major incident bucket. Another term that's actually kind of new for Itil 4 people is this term called swarming. It's a great function, a great thing that we do now within incident management. In the past, we used to go to level 1. If level 1 couldn't resolve it, to go to level 2 and level 3 and level 4 and keep going until someone was able to resolve it. We have found that that was inefficient. So what we're trying to do more and more of now is swarm. And by swarm, what we mean is gather all the resources that could possibly be able to resolve the incident together, have them all figure out where the problem or where the incident lies and how to resolve it. And then once it becomes clear as to who can work on that incident and who can resolve the incident, then you could let people go. But basically, all hands on deck, everyone starts working on it, everyone sees what the problem is, and then once we figure out where the problem lies roughly, then the other groups can go and the groups that can actually restore the service stay. That's how we are able to resolve and restore incidents much quicker than we were in the past. So swarming. And then lastly, technical debt. So technical debt is really the backlog of accumulated work that was bypassed in a previous, for example, a release. So if you're used to going through different releases on a twice annual basis, you may skip one and say, well, you know what, we'll worry about that one later. We'll skip this release and go to the next one. Well, whenever you do that, you're incurring some technical debt because eventually you have to go back and see, okay, what did I miss in that release? What should have I done that I skipped when I skipped that release? Do I need to go back to it? So you're always accumulating that technical debt, and eventually someone has to pay that debt. So that's what technical debt is in very simple terms. Some key concepts within incident management. So incident management is really where your customers get their general perspective of IT. If your incident management process, if your service desk, who's the primary interface with for incident management, if they are not doing what they need to do and they're not making their customers happy, then that'll come out in your customer satisfaction surveys. So it's very important that your customers perceive your incident management process as something of value. It's also important to log every incident because we need to make sure that we are aware of what's coming into our service desk, what they're working on, and we can see if we can make things better or move things or shift left if we need to. Set up some target resolution times. So if you do have SLAs, SLOs, or service level agreements or service level objectives, they should all be agreed to, documented, and communicated to ensure that expectations are realistic. No point putting in SLAs or SLOs that can't be met for both parties. That makes it difficult for everyone. The next bullet talks about prioritizing incidents. So incidents should not be done based on a first in, first out basis. They should be worked on based on what's most important. What has the biggest impact to my customer base? What needs to get done first, and what has to be done first based on the impact to the business. Each incident should have clearly identified owner at any stage of its life cycle. So if you're sending it to a resolver group that then has to say, well, I'm not the owner of that group or that type of incident, it should be clearly sent to the next group, and that group should have an explanation as to why it should go to them and also identify what that group name is. Then we also have standard impact, urgency, priority levels. Again, important to standardize that. Please, when you do set up your incident management service, make your priority levels simple, intuitive, and able to be judged at the identification of the incident. If you, for example, a bad idea is to try to make your incidents incident priorities based on how much dollar amount it's costing you. Service desks and customers typically have no idea what the dollar cost is of an incident when they're identifying the incident. So expecting them to prioritize them based on how much it's costing the company is a very, very difficult task. Please make it based on the symptoms that the customer would have at the onset of that incident. So it should be what they can to do at that specific time, what service is impacted, if that service is a critical service or not. That's how your incidents should be prioritized. Lastly, on this slide, it talks about handing off incidents to other groups. So your process of handing off incidents or escalating to the other groups should be defined and implemented. And of course, this all has to be done prior to your implementation of incident management. During an incident is not the time to figure out what the process should be. All this has to be done before you implement your incident management process. Last slide on incident management talks about team dynamics. So one of the things, or three of the things that we see are incidents are redirected between teams, so they're reassigned or bounced several times. Sometimes team members feel like they lack the power or the autonomy to work on incidents, or they're being blocked by others. And then other times we run into issues where it feels like it's a lone wolf type of hero that has to come in and save the day every time there's an incident. All these three things, although they're not terrible, there's things that you probably want to avoid. So to avoid these things, the only way to do it is to actually change the culture. And you change the culture by changing the behavior. And you change the behavior by changing the individual tasks. So you have to work on making your culture better. And three ways to do that is to have this collective responsibility where the team feels like they're all responsible for restoring service. It's not an our group versus another group type of culture. They're all working together. We're all one team trying to restore service, make sure the service for our customers as a whole is good. The second bullet about no blame culture, that one, especially in incident management, is very, very important because I know that I've been involved in incidents where the group that actually made the mistake and put in a change that they shouldn't have put in wasn't willing to admit it during the restoration effort. It did come out once we started going into our problem management process and realized what the underlying problem was. But if had that group felt like they wouldn't be blamed for making a mistake, we could have resolved that incident a lot quicker, a lot less cost to our company and to our customers. So you want to make sure that the blame isn't in the incident management. There's no space for blame in an incident management process. It's really just time for all hands to get together, all hands on deck to try to restore service as quickly as possible without the fear of blame. And then lastly, this continual learning. So to avoid this lone wolf, this hero that has to come in and save the day every time you have an incident, you want to have a knowledge management process or practice where the learning is shared amongst everyone within the team. And this goes back to this collective responsibility where you have to try to make your company feel like they're all part of the same group, they're all working towards the same common goal. So the last practice I'd wanted to go through is called change enablement practice. So for those familiar with Itil v3, this used to be called change management. We've changed the name in Itil 4 primarily because there's the organizational change management. That's also a practice within Itil 4. And to avoid confusion, we call change enablement, or what we used to call change management, change enablement, and then organizational change management is called organizational change management, and just it creates that division between the two. So the purpose of change enablement is to maximize the number of successful changes you put in place while minimizing the number of risks that you have to incur in order to make that change. We want to also make sure that not only are we addressing risk, but we're authorizing changes before they proceed. And lastly, managing a change schedule so there isn't an overlap between changes. There's more on this slide, and I'll go into that in the next slide. So just some key terms. So a change is any addition, modification, or removal of anything that could have a direct or indirect effect on services. The way I like to think of this is if your user can't describe what they're going to do without using the word change, then it is a change. So whenever you ask somebody to describe what they're going to do, and they say, well, it's not really a change, and then they say, well, I'm going to change this or add that or remove the other thing, then it's a change. And it should go through the change management process or the change enablement process. We have several different types of changes. We have a standard change, which is a low risk type of change, almost like a service request, except a standard change needs to be scheduled. So a standard change is something that has a low risk, pre-authorized change, well understood by everyone, really doesn't need a lot of approvals, might get approvals on an annual basis just to make sure it's still a standard change, but it's the stuff that you do on a day-to-day basis that doesn't necessarily need to go through any approvals. We have the change authority. This is the group that's responsible for authorizing a change. We have a change model, which is how we actually perform the work. So this is the repeatable approach to the management of a particular type of change. So, and I'll talk about the different types of changes in a moment, but one of them is called an emergency change. This is a change that has to be introduced as soon as possible. So we have different types of emergency changes. We have sometimes called emergency changes as a result of an incident. So we have to put in something in place because something has failed. So that's one type of emergency change. We also have expedited changes, which are changes that need to happen not because of an incident, but because there's not enough lead time as you would normally have for that type of incident. An example of that is a vendor could call and say, we're upgrading something or updating something in the next day or two, and we absolutely need to, we're going to put this in place whether you like to or not. So that's an example of an expedited change. It's not an incident. It's not causing an incident. It could potentially cause an incident, but it's not causing an incident. It just has to be reviewed, and the risk has to be mitigated a lot quicker than you normally would on that type of change. So one of the important things about change enablement, and to also reduce the bureaucracy of change enablement, that process. So for people who have been around a while, people tend to think that change enablement and change management in general is bureaucratic, operational, adds a bunch of overhead that they didn't want to have to go through. In the days of agile, it's not the time to add bureaucracy. So really what we want to do is we want to minimize the amount of changes that need to go through a formal authorization process. So you want to make sure that there's a balance, though, between the changes that have to go through a formal change process and the ones that don't have to go through that formal change process in order to go to market a lot quicker. So there's a balance between that throughput and the change effectiveness and risk mitigation. So approaches to change planning, authorization, and ongoing control need to be selected carefully. So you have to make sure your change model follows something that will address both those issues, both the throughput and the risk control that you want to have in place with any change enablement practice. So this is my last slide, and it talks about the change authorization. Again, this has to do with who has the ability to approve things and what should go through CAB. A CAB, for those who don't know, is a change advisory board. These are really they're bureaucratic systems of authorizing changes. People don't tend to not like CABs. They tend to see them as bureaucratic and something that we need to get rid of. In my opinion, we should not get rid of CABs. In my opinion, what we should do is make sure that our CABs are used effectively. So our CABs should be brief. The only changes that should go through CAB are the changes that absolutely need to be reviewed by the business. They should not be bureaucratic in terms of what we need to look at from a technical perspective. The technical part of that change should have been discussed with the technical groups prior to coming to CAB. The CAB should only be about looking at the change from a business perspective, whether it's worth the risk. So reviewing the risk and the reward and making sure that the reward outweighs the risk and all risks, or as much of the risk as possible, has been mitigated. Going through CAB creates a bottleneck because you usually have CABs once a week or sometimes more often, but most companies have them once a week. So if you have to wait a week before you put a change in, that does create a bottleneck in your value stream. So we want to minimize those delays. We want to limit how much time we have to go through and what has to be involved in that, in putting together that change that goes through the CAB and so on. So the last 4 bullets talk about following guidelines for change authorization. So changes should be authorized based on resource, cost, and priority considerations. The bureaucratic portion of it should be avoided as much as possible. Change models should define the requirements and procedures for authorization. And really what I mean by that is make sure your standard changes are standard changes and they don't have to go through a huge change process or go through a CAB, certainly not through a CAB. Some of your low risk normal changes don't have to go through a CAB. Maybe they just have to be authorized, they have to be peer reviewed or approved by a manager. Some of your more significant changes might have to be approved by a manager and a peer and possibly InfoSec. But make sure your model, the model that you're using, works for your company, because you want to maximize the throughput and minimize the risk. You want to have those controls in place. If you work for a highly regulated company, you have to show that proof that you have gone through a vetting process and a risk mitigation process as part of your regulatory compliance. So lastly, what I mean by that is the change authority, the people who have the ability to approve a change, have to be at the appropriate level and have to be at the appropriate group. Asking the network team to approve a server change doesn't make a lot of sense. So the network team should be responsible for the network changes because they understand the network better than anyone else. And then the business should only have to approve changes that need to be approved by the business because there's a risk that they need to be aware of. And that's it for me. Svetlana, let's go back to you.
Thank you, Costa. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. And now we will move further. I will introduce you Giovanna D'Angelo. She will introduce herself and she will move on with the rest of their selected practices.
Thank you, Svetlana. My name is Giovanna D'Angelo. I'm an Itil expert and Itil 4 managing professional. I'm also currently working as a program manager for the Provincial Health Services Authority in Vancouver, BC. Today, I'm going to be presenting 3 Itil practices, which include service request management, problem management, and service level management. So service request management is really a practice that's used to support end user requests. This includes providing information to users and customers about the availability of services. So as an example, a user may call the service desk about an application's availability. The service desk would then advise the user that that specific application is scheduled for maintenance regularly every Tuesday and Thursday between 7 and 9 p.m. And therefore it will be unavailable during those windows. So armed with this information, the user may adjust their work schedule and planning their work around that. Another example is they could provide information on how to obtain services. So for instance, if a user requires a desktop technician to perform a physical move of several workstations within their department, the service desk may instruct the user to fill in a form on the self-service portal, provide the location, time that they require the technician to come on site, and even a list of users who will be moved. Service requests can also be used for just general information. That can range from a simple compliment. A user may have had a positive experience with a new tool that was launched, or it could even be a formal complaint about perhaps an IT staff member that they were frustrated with and they want that issue to be escalated. And lastly, service request management not only provides a channel for users to request standard services such as software and hardware, but it's also responsible for the sourcing and delivery of those services. And of course, it's in an effective and user-friendly manner. So service requests are essentially just a normal part of service delivery. It's not a failure of or degradation of service, that's handled in incidents. A service request is really just defined as a request from a user that's initiated and agreed upon, which is key. It needs to be agreed upon, and then service action is taken after that. So service requests are typically handled by the service desk. They don't require requests for changes, or RFCs as they're often called, and you don't have to have those submitted. If there is a change that's required, they're typically managed as a standard change for service requests. Some examples of service requests include providing a report to a user, or performing a password reset. These examples are examples of service delivery action. The fulfiller essentially has to do something to address the user's request. Service requests can also be used for the provision of services, such as a laptop or server request. If a user requires access to a file or folder, that request is often referred to as a service request as well, and that's a quite common one. And finally, any feedback, complaints, or compliments are also tracked as service requests. And it's important to remember that the follow-up of service requests often reside with the service desk. Now, because service requests are predefined and agreed upon in advance with the customer, they're usually quite formalized. Now, what that means is there's a very clear understanding of the delivery of the services, how it's initiated, if approval is required, and so on and so forth. It's really not uncommon for service requests to have specific workflows associated to them. And these workflows can be quite simple. For example, a user submits a request to add their name to an email distribution list, and that is done by the service desk. Or they can be quite complex, with potentially multiple approvers, multiple fulfillers performing different actions. One example of what often is considered to be a more complex workflow is onboarding. Oftentimes, a form has to be filled in by an HR representative. Then it might go to the hiring manager, who has to review it and approve it. Then the service desk might create multiple tickets for different support agents for different aspects of the ticket. So perhaps the ticket goes to an administrator to set up an AD account, and then might go to procurement to address a hardware request. A desktop technician might get a ticket to install it, and they might even have a specific VPN access that might go to security for approval. The list goes on. So depending on the type of person joining the organization, the workflow can be complex or it could be simple. But either way, regardless of the complexity or the steps that need to be taken, they should always be documented. They should be well known, training should be provided, and they should be followed. For instance, if there's some standard requests, based on their dollar value, maybe for a hardware item at $3,000, it will go to a director for approval. But if it's simply a mouse that the user requires, that may not require approval at all. So all these things need to be documented to ensure that protocols are being followed, to avoid delays, and to ensure that any prerequisites are met. So in order to ensure that service requests are handled successfully, there are some certain guidelines that need to be followed. So wherever possible, the service request and their fulfillment should be standardized and automated to the greatest degree possible, and where it makes sense. So an IT department may offer a self-service portal, which again offers the ability for users to perform activities that an IT personnel would otherwise perform, such as ordering equipment or a printer cartridge for their toner, or setting up a user account. So some service requests can be completely fulfilled by automation from beginning to end. Another example of that could be a password reset, at which point the user will enter their email address, they'll get the email, they'll click on the link, and voila, their password has been reset. There are some examples where even a client software installation might be entirely automated. It's important that regardless, that expectations around the fulfillment times are clearly set and communicated to the user. So everyone, if you asked anyone, everyone might have a difference of opinion on how long things should take. You know, if you ask your neighbor, they might think that a software should be installed in 3 days, and if you ask the service desk, they may say no, that takes 10 days. So it's really important that those expectations are set, and that ensures that you have happy customers, that the agents as well are satisfied, and they're meeting their deliverables as well. And service request management success is really dependent upon well-designed processes and procedures. These are operationalized through tracking, automation tools to really maximize their efficiency. And there's really different types of service requests, and they all have different fulfillment workflows. So when a new service request needs to be added to the service catalog, at most of the time you want to look at your existing workflow models, see if anything can be leveraged wherever it's possible. And lastly, policies and workflows should really be included, specifically when documenting or redirecting a service request that actually should have been an incident or change, as an example. Now we're going to be talking a little bit about problem management. So this next practice is really an important one, and it marries very well with incident management. So the purpose of problem management is really about reducing the likelihood and adverse impacts often of incidents. And they do that by determining what the root cause is, managing any workarounds associated with that, and any known errors. So problem management, again, is very closely linked to incident management. And in smaller organizations, you'll actually find a lot of the times that the same individual will play the role of the incident manager and the problem manager because of how closely they are tied. And regardless of who plays the role, it's really important that incident and problem management are designed to work together, especially when we're referring to them within the value chain. So problem management really was developed to manage errors in the production environment. Its focus is to identify those errors, analyze them, understand them, determine ways to minimize their impacts through workarounds or to identify the root cause, and to eventually resolve the issue permanently. So here, there's a couple of key terms that are quite important for problem management. So problem management, if it's defined, is essentially a cause or potential cause of one or more incidents. And when a problem record is logged in your service tool, it's often by the service desk, and at that point in time, the root cause is usually unknown. Now, when it comes to proactive problem management, it's really about preventing the incidents from occurring in the first place. So this will be done through a couple of different methods. One way of doing it is by analyzing incident data. You can identify some trends and some reoccurring incidents. This can be done through manual reports. It could be done through automated reports coming from a monitoring tool, as an example. It's really about trying to prevent them before the user or anyone even knows they are there. There might be a vendor or supplier that you're working with who is performing analysis, and they identify a problem before it's actually manifested itself in an incident. There's also cases where a project team might find a problem and let you know about it before the project goes live. Now, reactive problem management is really about preventing incidents from reoccurring, and they may also help to resolve open incidents. A problem manager may get information about a potential problem through a notification, through multiple incidents that were reported, or even through major incidents. They might determine that a major incident was caused by a problem, as an example, and that really falls under that reactive bucket. When we're talking about a known error, it's really just defined as a problem that's been analyzed but has not yet been resolved. And these known errors should really be recorded, and they're often recorded at something called a known error database, or a KEDB for short. And this database is used by problem management, by incident management. It'll be used by the service desk and different teams. It's going to have all the information about the known errors, If any workarounds exist, they'll also be included in there. In some cases, it might be possible to find a workaround to the incident caused by the problem, which is essentially just a temporary way of overcoming the difficulties. Now, when a workaround is found, it's really important that the problem record remains open, and any details around the workaround are documented within that problem record. In some cases, there may be multiple workarounds associated with even just one problem. And most of the time, the workarounds are there so that they reduce the impact of the future incidents and even reduce the likelihood or improving the speed to resolution if they do happen again. Sometimes a workaround is not implemented even if the cause of the problem or the resolution has been identified. Now, there may be business reasons for this, but oftentimes it's related to cost. Sometimes the cost to resolve the problem, even though we know how to resolve it, is really too high for what the value is going to provide. And so it's not justified. So don't always think that a workaround means you failed. Sometimes it just makes business sense to not resolve the problem permanently and to just deal with the workaround. Now, they are often done through a repeatable process. So the last one here is around problem models. And that's really about the approach to manage a particular problem or type of problem. So organizations may define that a type of root cause analysis be performed, that method of root cause analysis be performed for specific problems, or they might suggest that certain groups are engaged for a specific type of problem. So it's more about the organization just building out these models and having some repeatable process for approaching problems in the future, so you're not always looking at it with a different approach in mind. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the activities related to problem management. So this probably goes without saying, but the first step is to identify and analyze the problem. So this is around the analysis and control of known errors. So if you do that, there's a known error, then there's some control pieces that are also covered in that section. So an example here is that the service desk may suspect there's a problem through repeat incidents and through trend analysis. And then the problem will then be assigned to a person or a group who start investigating the root cause. And not all problems are treated equally. So the speed and the nature of the investigation will really vary depending on what the impact and urgency are of the problem, which leads to the priority of the problem. So depending on whether or not they feel this is creating a lot of impact to the business or the likelihood of it reoccurring might impact how the resolver groups are going to be prioritizing that. And either way, the appropriate level of resources and expertise should always be applied to at least finding a resolution, whether it be done now or later. Once a root cause has been identified, then we start talking about a fix and how that fix is implemented. And it's really about implementing the fix so that it's reducing the impact of the problem. If a change is required, like an RFC is required to apply the fix, that should always be applied so we have the right authorization in place and ensure those protocols are being followed. It's also very important to provide information about problems to some relevant stakeholders. So it could be user teams. If a workaround has been determined, it's important that information is shared so that when calls come in, it can be applied right away. It might even make sense to communicate with the user directly. Maybe there's an action they need to take in order to fix their issue, or maybe they just need to validate that the error has been removed. So it's really important that, if problems are being worked on and being resolved, that they are being communicated with the right people. And lastly, goes without saying in a lot of the practices, is around continual improvement. So like all the other ones, problem management is no exception. It's really focused on continuous improvement, and it should be applied to errors and monitoring the system regularly. we talked a little bit about this, but these are some of the major problem management processes, and they marry very well together. So the first box you'll see there is around the problem identification, and that can be either through the proactive means of problem management or the reactive. And problem identification is really responsible to identify and log those problems. And then through trend analysis, duplication of incidents reported by the service desk, or analyzing information from, let's say, a supplier, a software development team, even project teams might identify that. They'll be logged into the tool where you store all your problems. Now, the second box here is really around problem control, and that's really focused on prioritizing the problem based on the risks that it poses. So again, these risks are managed, and they're based on their potential for the impact and the probability or the likelihood of them manifesting themselves. If it's determined that a problem can't be resolved quickly, it really makes sense for a workaround to be applied. That can at least address future incidents while the problem or root cause continues to be investigated. So if we start realizing, this is taking a long time, we're not sure we're going to get to an answer anytime soon, some investment should be made on at least identifying a workaround for that. And workarounds, of course, need to be documented in the problem record so that they're available for use. Error control is the last sort of underpinning process here that we're going to be talking about, and it's really focused on regularly reassessing the status of known errors that have not been resolved. So perhaps the impact of a problem that was acceptable in the past may no longer be acceptable. So business needs are constantly changing, and so over time that problem just maybe it's just not possible to keep going, and we need to now invest some money into resolving it. Even as it relates to workarounds, we might have a workaround that's been great for a year, and you know what, maybe we should look at that workaround, and is there something better we can do? Is there a workaround that maybe improves the reduction of steps that need to be taken, or maybe we can even start introducing automation in the workaround? So it's really key that when you're addressing problems, whether it be through workarounds or through resolution, that you're constantly going back and validating that you're still getting it right and nothing needs to be changed. The last practice that we're going to be talking about today is around service level management. So service level management's objective is really around establishing a shared view of services and target services with the customer. So it's achieved by defining, documenting, agreeing, monitoring, measuring, reporting, and reviewing the levels of services. Now, service level management is about negotiation. It's the service provider and the customer talking about what the service requirements are and what the service provider can realistically achieve. So there's really no point in building an SLA where they have unrealistic or unreasonable targets. All that's going to happen there is you're going to have IT staff that feel pressured and their morale will be affected. That'll go down because they're constantly missing their targets. And on the flip side, you'll have customers that are frustrated that they're promised one thing and they're delivered another. So it's really a balance to make sure that whatever you are agreeing with the customer is achievable. You don't want to use the phrase, overpromise, underdeliver, but you definitely want to avoid overpromising because it will always come back. And if done correctly, service level management, or SLM, can really improve the relationship you have with your business and your customers, as well as the communication. So when people know what to expect, and those offering the service are focused on meeting those expectations, you'll inevitably have happier customers. It's no different than when you order a pizza and you call for pizza and they tell you it'll be there in 10 minutes. You expect that pizza to arrive in 10 minutes. If it arrives in 45 minutes, you're a little more upset. But if right at the moment they say 45 minutes, it creates a better expectation. And that's what really service level management's all about. And really the last note here is it's really about ensuring that specific and measurable service targets are developed. So the key word here is measurable. We hear this a lot in ITIL. If you can't measure it, then you can't report on it. So for example, if you have an SLA that states you're going to provide excellent customer service, but you don't have a vehicle to gather that feedback, and you don't really have a quantifiable definition of excellent, then it really can't be used to measure an SLA. It's important to note that service reviews, where you're meeting with the customer on a regular basis, should be performed. And that's really about ensuring that you're continuing to meet their needs. Their needs are constantly changing, and so to keep in touch with them is really key, and it kind of ties back with the continuous improvement we talked about earlier. So here we have a couple of key definitions around service level agreements and service levels in general. So really, a service level agreement is a documented agreement between a service provider and a customer, and it identifies the services that are required and expected levels of service. So when we're talking about a service level, it's one or more metrics that defines the expected or achieved service quality. So when you're building out your SLA, it's really important to find and identify what the requirement is. And often that's through like a formal statement. That's what's needed. Then once you know what your requirements are, then you can start to build out the agreement. And that follows with a document that describes a formal understanding between, two or more parties. It's not legally binding unless it forms a contract. It's just, again, it's creating the expectations and an understanding. You'll find some key things in an SLA. Obviously they include, service level targets, if there's response or resolution times and so on and so forth. But you'll also see things in there like, hours of service. For example, during the business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. They might even provide instructions for the user to report the issue. And that's key. So service level agreements aren't just responsibilities for the IT service provider. There's also responsibility on the customer in that agreement as well. And really the key is that it needs to be related to defined outcomes. And that's not just operational metrics, it's also about striking that balance. So for example, it may appear that you're meeting your SLA targets. However, the customer may still be unhappy with the services being provided. This is known as what they refer to as the watermelon effect, where everything's kind of green on the outside and red on the inside. So, you're looking at your stats, you're looking at your numbers, you're seeing 99.6% availability. But that one time the system did go down was during finances year end. So that was a huge impact on their business. So that's why they're unhappy, regardless of the 99.6%. So it's really key here that we're constantly staying in contact with the customer. We're getting their feedback directly. If the customer satisfaction isn't being measured in a way that is measurable, then you risk to have those unhappy customers. So seeking that customer satisfaction doesn't have to be an arduous task. You see very simple ways to gather feedback. You can do it through survey, but even something simpler, when you go to the airport, if you're in the washroom, when you leave the washroom, you might see a stand where it's got a happy face and a sad face, and you just click on the button to identify, to express your impression of the cleanliness of the washroom. So something as simple as that is a way to measure customer satisfaction. So the last thing we're going to talk about here is SLAs, OLAs, and underpinning contracts. So an SLA is really an agreement, as we mentioned earlier, between the customer and the service provider. And it's describing the services, the service level targets. It includes, again, responsibilities on both the customer's end and the service provider's end. Now, an operational level agreement, or an OLA for short, is an internal agreement between a service provider's internal teams to support the SLA targets. So that's important to note that, there's no reason for an OLA if you don't have an SLA that it's sort of supporting. So an example of an OLA could be an OLA between the service desk team and the desktop team. So before an incident is passed to the desktop team, there might be information that they require to be gathered or logged in the ticket before reassigning it. So an OLA could have that information. It'll also identify the amount of time before you pass the ticket on to that group. That desktop team may also have an operational level agreement with, let's say, the network team for the same service. So I'll explain why this becomes quite important. So when you have, let's say for an example, a 4-hour resolution SLA, and the desktop team's working on the incident, and they've been working on it for about 3 hours, and then they pass it on to the network team. They realize they can't resolve it. It's probably going to be a network issue. Now the network team has the ticket and they only have 1 hour left in the SLA to resolve it. And this is something that you hear oftentimes, is that tickets get passed too late and doesn't give much opportunity for the following team to meet the SLA targets. So in this example, if there was an OLA that stated that, for instance, that the service desk would work on the issue for 30 minutes before passing it on to the desktop team, and then there was a separate OLA for the desktop team to work on the issue for only an hour before passing it over to the network team, now we have a lot more time for troubleshooting to be taking place and more opportunity to meet the service level agreements. Now, another key contract that we're going to be talking about lastly here is underpinning contracts. And what that contract is it's a contract with the service provider and then a third-party vendor. So an example here would be, let's say you have printers that are serviced or outsourced through a service to another company. You would have a contract, an underpinning contract with that organization. And then that contract would likely have some sort of SLAs associated to it. So how this again becomes important is if you have an underpinning contract with a third-party vendor and their fulfillment time or resolution time is 4 hours, and you have the same resolution time with your customer, you're not really giving yourself a lot of room for either diagnosing the issue or looking at it first. And so what you really want to do is, depending on what the service level agreement is with your underpinning contract, you want to kind of add some buffer time there and then develop the SLA with your client or customer. And that pretty much concludes the 3 practices that we were talking about: service request management, problem management, and lastly, service level management. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. And now we will move to the last part of our Itil masterclass, Itil 4 masterclass, and I will present you where to find further references regarding the topics which we have covered today. Just to remind you that Itil is a library of books. And you can, of course, purchase these books and make your reading, or you can join our courses and hear from our experts and our trainers. But I would like to introduce you what's in it for you. And I can guarantee you, regardless of where you are and which domain of IT or IT service management you belong to, you can find something for yourself, something very valuable. Either you are in Agile DevOps, either you are on a service desk or infrastructure operations, governance, continual improvement, management of change, project management office, any domain of IT, there is a reference for you. And I will now show you where and how you can seek for it. The first one, of course, Itil 4 Foundation. In Foundation, you find basic language, basic concepts, understanding how the system works. And you get exposed to the concepts of practices, processes, value streams. You learn about the main practices such as service desk, incident management, problem management, change enablement, and so on and so forth. So this is very high level. And today you were exposed to this knowledge already in a very small portion. Itil 4 Foundation class or publication covers, of course, more. And this is a prerequisite for the further learning to move on to the next levels, to the more elaborated and advanced publications or courses. This course you can take in class, in public, or you can bring to your organization. You can do self-study. We offer you the self-study Itil 4 Foundation classes, which if you prefer to study by yourself, that's also possible. But let's take a look at other knowledge and publications. So the first one, advanced, is Create, Deliver, and Support. This publication belongs to their stream of Itil specialists. It's for everyone. It's about operations. It's about how to implement your Itil processes and value streams. This is about your service desk, incident management, change enablement, how it all works together. Optimization of your operations, and so on and so forth. So for each module or for each publication, I have a small video for you. I will show you the video now. Well, next one is Drive Stakeholder Value, DSV. And this module, this publication is for those who are facing customers, the ones who are in relationship management, in business relationship management, in service level management, the ones who are looking forward to enhance the user experience and customer experience and ensure the business and IT alignment and convergence. This publication is extremely valuable for organizations providing external services to external customers. It covers concepts of the consumer journey and teaches us how to ensure that our users have a great experience. I find this publication awesome. And this is very new approach for Itil, the something which we haven't seen before. Well, I'll show you the video now. Next publication and module is High Velocity IT. If you are an organization who is moving to the product-oriented mindset, if you are an organization who embed Agile, DevOps, moving to continual integration, continual delivery, and building their cross-functional team in a matrix way to deliver value to your customers, this is the module for you. This module, this publication doesn't have an equivalent in ITIL v3. It's totally new. High Velocity IT publication is teaching us to unlearn some things which we knew in the past and learn the new things. Learn that it's not, it's okay to fail, but we need to fail fast to move forward. It teaches us that we need to collaborate, that we need to trust, that we need to listen to each other, and it teaches us how to work in a new environment of high velocity IT. Let's see the video. And another one, next one is Direct, Plan, and Improve, DPI. Here we see everything about the governance of practices, processes, about the governance of IT in general, continual improvement, and everything related to their risk management, IT controls, and the management of change. the final one, the latest and greatest one, is Digital and IT Strategy, DITS. This is for leaders. This is their publication or course for those who want to lead or leading their IT service management initiatives and building the digital and IT strategy. In this course, we are mostly doing their learning of the cases, doing the exchange and group discussions to come up with conclusions rather than listening to their instructor or reading. And this is a change which is targeted to teach leaders, to give them hands-on acumen on how to build the digital IT strategy. Actually, we're learning how to do it in a hands-on, interactive way. That's pretty much it about the references and publications. Just to remind you about this whole schema of Itil, and that all courses are available in our IT chapter website in the training section. And now we are going to the period of questions and answers. I would like to ask the panelists to put themselves on video. And thank you. And do we have Costa and Giovanna? Look, it's a full house here. Thank you very much. And the questions here are, I have some questions. Please don't hesitate to send us questions. Even if we will not be able to answer all of questions now, we will send you answers after the webinar. And we will make this recording on demand. You will be able to access it later. And yeah, there was a little bit glitch in the first part, which we fixed in the second part with the video, but we'll try to optimize it for your consummation when you will access it via recording. So the question here is, what exactly is shift left? It's question to Costa, to yourself.
Sure. So shifting left really means taking the work and transferring it more towards what we call the left. So the left is what we, not necessarily left in terms of liberals and conservatives. It's more what's a higher level to a lower level type of work. So if you go from a level 3 work, so if you're going to the people who are doing the development work and then shifting it left to the people who do the support, then you're going from a level 3 to a level 2. The people that do the level 2 support, if you send that to a level 1 to, like, let's say the service desk, then you're shifting left again. And then ultimately what we're after is trying to move the work to a level 0 spot where the customer is able to get their information, if they want to, themselves. So that's really what we're after, and we kind of consider that if you write numbers from 0 to 1, you start on the left and you go towards the right. So that's why we're shifting left. Is how that works.
So as another example, another question here, Costa, also to you. Give an example of swarming. What is it and how it's used in ITSM operations? Yeah,
so swarming is actually probably my favorite concept in Itil 4. It really helps people stop the reassignment of tickets. Especially with major incidents, you want to have them resolved as quickly as you possibly can. And in the past, what we used to do is we used to send it to level 1, level 2, and then if it wasn't really a level 2 thing, it would go to level 3, it would kind of escalate functionally. And then if we went to level 3, for example, and level 3 guy said, well, it's not really a network issue, it's a server issue, then we'd have to go through repeat the whole cycle, and that was a complete waste of time. So what swarming does is, if we don't know what the clear path to the resolution is, we have an incident, we don't really know what is causing it or how to resolve it, we'll get the network team involved, we'll get the server team involved, we'll get everyone involved in that restoration effort, into that bridge, into that call. Or if you could do it online if you want, like through a chat. But everyone gets together, they describe the symptoms, they try to look for how to resolve this as quickly as possible, whether it's a rollback or a fix forward type of approach. And then once you have a clear path to resolution, then the groups that aren't involved in the restoration, they can drop off and go back to their regular business day. But really what it does is it brings everybody together to see what they need to do in order to restore service as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Costa. Another question here, service level management, concept of OLA, operational level agreement, how it applies to development team? That's question to Giovanna.
So I think the importance there is defining those really early on. When it comes to the deployment of anything, a lot of the times we put it into production and then we find out later on that we don't really have a clear understanding of who's doing what and how that's going to be supporting the business. So, we talk a lot about how things get kind of pushed through really quickly and we don't take the time we need to really understand exactly what everyone's part is in the support and getting agreement on when things get passed on from one to the other. So I think that's really the key with that, is doing it really early. Don't leave it to the last minute, and making sure that everyone's on the same page on how to support it once it does go into production.
Yeah, thank you, Giovanna. So I have a question here. So how product management and IT service management are working together? Our organization is product management and not ITSM oriented. Wow, this is a $1 million question, and there's a good answer which we get from Itil, and I guess this question is to me. Itil 4 is giving us very clear schema on how the products and services are related to each other. Ultimately, every product is delivered and part of the service. So the service and service offering is the top layer, which is appended, if you wish, on the top of the product, which in turn uses resources. Okay, so we use resources, which is people, budgets, infrastructures, applications, and so on and so forth, to create product, and then we're using this product to deliver services. So the IT service management and product management are working hand in hand together. Itil 4 advanced publications give us great teaching about product management lifecycle and a lot of product management techniques, as well as product ownership, which is another concept here, right? So the product ownership is participating in product management and ultimately in delivering service. So, and I want to get back to the last question, what is the difference between service and service offering? I think it was a great question, and I know, Xalani, you answered, but maybe if you want to elaborate it further, because we answered it via chat here, but maybe somebody didn't see the chat, so I think it's a great question here. That's going to be our last question, unless we see more. We have another one. So do you want to answer, Xalani?
Yeah, so I think I did answer that. Because at the end of the day, I think what you have to understand is that it's the whole concept of, what underpins what, right? So service offerings, they're pretty much describing, right, a set. It could be one or more of those services, right? And again, which links back to the same sort of like answer that you gave about the, product versus, services, right? Where products actually underpin those services. But then you may have a grouping of services, which get to be a service offering. And typically, those service offerings, they are created for, a group of customers, right, as well.
Well, thank you, Xalani. And that was the last question. And so we see here the comments with thank you to our team. And on this note, we will close our webinar. And please follow us on LinkedIn, our page. We share our thoughts very often there. We have blog on IT Chapter. Follow our blog. We publish blog every week, and hope to see you soon in our webinars or in our classes. That's it for today. Have a great day, and the webinar will be available to you. You will receive the link soon on demand, the recording. Thank you. And I will close. And thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your trust. And we hope to see you soon with us. We are now opening the series of webinars. Please follow us on LinkedIn. Please subscribe to our newsletter. You will get invitations. We will talk more about the specific selected practices and other hot topics. And have a great day today.